Hello everyone, and thank you for coming back to yet another episode of The Gloving Paradigm. I am your host Peter, aka LPD8 Dubuque, and holy crap, was there a lot of stuff going on this past week. So, just wanted to cover real quickly that the reason why I didn't cover the announcement date of the release of the Evolutions was because I recorded the episode well before the announcement came out, so unfortunately my timing's a little off by a whole week basically. So if you haven't heard already, and if you haven't heard, that's insane because it's been plastered literally everywhere that Glovers hang out with online and in person. The Evolutions are out. They are currently going for pretty much $140 plus some tax. If you actually use some discount code, you'll actually get them down a little bit cheaper. I know some people were saying that if you use a discount code, you can get them to $126 altogether. So definitely use your discount codes if you need to actually get them a little bit cheaper so you can actually save a couple of bucks. Which discount code is up to you. If you need to find discount codes, you can literally look all over the Glovers Lounge, Art of Gloving, even on Reddit. People post them literally everywhere, so it's not really hard to find one. Anyways, getting to the meat of the entire episode is going to be very interesting because I kind of found this subject through an outside source, and I thought it would be very interesting for me to actually cover it this week because it was just something that actually made a lot of sense to me to actually talk about. And at first, when it was first brought to me, the term was good form, but I believe the correct or the more elaborate term that we should be using is proper technique. Okay, I'm not necessarily breaking down the whole pillar of tech, but it's just something that I felt like this would be good for a lot of newcomers to try to understand and try to utilize it early on to really help shape their entire craft of gloving. So what really brought on this subject about was I was watching a question and answer video from Brian Shaw at Straw Strength. He has a wonderful YouTube channel. I absolutely love his content. He brings on really interesting characters as his guests, and the chemistry that happens between them and Brian Shaw is just phenomenal. And I actually just overall really like his content, so that's pretty much why I watch it, is the entertainment value. But he was doing a Q&A, and somebody asked him what is paramount for him in training when he's actually training for these strongman competitions. And what he said is a good form of exercise. To him, lifting the biggest amounts of weights and how many reps you can get in, to him is not as important as getting the form to do the exercise down properly. So to him, he calls it good form. For what I can understand, proper technique is probably the proper vernacular of the subject. So the main reason why this matters to us is that it tails into everything that gloving is as a whole, as well as everything else that has some form of another. If we're an art form, there is a good form and a bad form. So another reason why this really, really matters is that every concept archetype, if you guys remember from my previous episodes on the archetypes of gloving, they each have their own proper technique of actually having be performed. If you look at things like finger rolls, isolations, whips, tutting, clusters, digits, dials, all these different concept archetypes that we have out there right now, they all have a proper technique to utilize. Okay? So that's something that you have to keep in mind when you're actually starting to learn these concept archetypes, is that there are a proper technique to actually doing them. Okay? If you want to think about it in the sense, the proper technique should be your foundation to any concept archetype, because without good form, how can it actually look good? You know what I mean? If it's not properly done, it does not look clean, it does not look crisp, it does not look correct, whatever choice words you want to use in this situation. Many dance forms have their own form of proper techniques, like look at ballroom dancing, where your arm placements and your foot placements are important. And if you look at contemporary dancing, how your shapes are supposed to evoke a certain way and actually create certain lines and forms. Martial arts has proper technique. It's, if you want to really stretch it out there, you got martial arts, you got dance, you got painting, drawing, all different forms that you literally use the word art in it, there's a proper technique. That's pretty much how I've always looked at it when it came to things like loving or dance or even martial arts to that extent, or even to any performance arts of acrobatics or gymnastics, whatever the case may be. There's always a proper technique to do these performances. So, examples that I can think of when it comes to proper techniques, like a very basic and the simplest one I can think of is literally finger rolls. When you're doing a finger roll, the classic palms facing upwards, everyone should be understanding that the most common way that people say that it's very proper is that your hands literally have to be parallel to themselves to make one continuous line. What I like to say is keep them parallel to the floor, because then you're keeping both of them at the same length and you're keeping them at the same angle, making that straight line. Now, I know some people are probably going to say, well, when you are turning it, you're turning your hands. Yes, that is true. However, if you're doing it properly, your hands should still kind of make that straight line at the base knuckles of your hands, okay? That's one good example. Isolations is a very great example in terms of proper technique, because what you're trying to do is evoke this illusion that one thing is moving around another, thus isolating it in its spot. So learning how to keep, let's just say, your index finger in the same position while you move the rest of your hand around is the proper technique to evoke that illusion of the isolation, that it's staying in one place while everything around it is moving. Okay, if you look at like whips, whips and tutting basically, what a lot of people tend to forget or just neglect to even talk about is your arms and elbow placements when it comes to these things. When doing like tunnels, you got to get those elbows swinging out so you can actually get that full extent of the tunnel with your fingers. So the placement of your elbows and your shoulders are actually just as important as your hand placements, because by extension those are the things that are helping you put your hands in the proper placements. So having the proper technique to know where your elbows and your shoulders should be placed while you're doing these moves are also going to help facilitate even further. Okay, especially if you look like at tutting for the basic example, just making boxes and drawing the boxes and connecting the boxes back together. There's a certain proper technique. From what I see, a lot of people when they're doing tutting, they have their elbows out, because to me it makes a lot more sense where you have them out so you can actually turn your hands a little bit more to actually give that full range of effect. So the one concept archetype that I know that takes the elbows and shoulders placements to the literal extreme is king tutting, because you're actually utilizing your elbows and your shoulders to facilitate points on the grid, as well as making it just a much wider movement. So when it comes to king tutting, yes, it's more important to understand where your elbows need to be and where your shoulders need to be. That way you're getting everything in the proper place, so your lines are clean and crisp and where they need to be. So things of that nature is something that you actually want to sit there and think about. Is when it comes to certain techniques, is you want to make sure that you're also incorporating your placement of your elbows and your shoulders, so that way you're actually facilitating not only those basic forms into that archetype, but you can actually translate those into other archetypes to help you expand on your craft even more. If you look at whips and tutting, since the elbow placement is actually a little bit more important than what people actually realize, is that those actually work together to help facilitate each other. So if you can get whips down, it should, at least in theory, it should help you learn tutting a little bit more, because you already know where your arms need to be. There are certain moves that you have to do where you have to have your elbows really tucked in, or even in front of you, pretty much sitting in your abdomen. So those are the things that I'm hoping you guys are actually taking into consideration when it comes to actually watching tutorials, is to actually watch where not only the hand placements are, but arm placement, elbow placement, shoulder placement, things of that nature. That way you can actually fully understand the full range of motion that you have to do to get the proper technique down. So there are certain ways to actually work on getting these forms and techniques down. simple ways of doing it is using tools. And one great example I always like to use is that if you watch one of the basic liquid tutorials that Amazing Lights actually produced, if I remember correctly, it was Trips who was doing the tutorial, and he was talking about holding one of your gloves in between both of your hands and doing the whole wave motion to get your body to understand how your hands are supposed to work together to create the effect of the hand wave, basically, or pretty much being able to teach you the technique of having one hand follow another. Another huge thing that I know he was also saying is that once you actually learn to do it one way, do the opposite way so you can help expand on the concept even more, which is fantastic in my opinion. It's, when you construct something, you should be able to deconstruct it, to reconstruct it, and deconstruct it again. Like I said in a previous video, learning the ins and outs of these movements and these positions and these techniques are going to help facilitate more of a foundation to help you really utilize all the other techniques in a more fluid way. So, you have that as an example. Another great example is, and I'm sorry if I butcher your name, but I'm really bad with names. Everyone should know this, that I'm good with faces, I'm horrible with names. But Vajana actually has a tutorial out there when he was talking about isolations and digits, how he talked about using a hard flat surface to actually help teach your muscles how to isolate certain fingers to keep in one place while you move everything else around. That's another very great tool that you can use. Another thing that will actually help a lot of people is to basically when it comes to certain isolations that I think about, where you want to keep one hand still and you want to have the other hand moving around. The thing is that you're moving around, your hand's going to tend to start moving around as well, right? That you're trying to keep still. I know one person on Reddit that responded. It was quite interesting how he called it drifting, and it makes sense what he means by that, where it kind of just kind of drifts away from the place it needs to be, or you're moving it closer to the other hand that's moving around. That's totally understandable. And a way that I thought of that would help you with that problem is to actually just go up to a wall. You're facing towards a wall, and you put one hand on there that you're wanting to keep still, and then you're just going to move your body around and move your arm around, so you're teaching your muscles how to keep the hand still while you're moving everything else around. It gives a way for your body to learn, hey, my hand needs to stay still, these muscles need to move and contract and expand to facilitate that motion, right? That's one idea, is using hard flat surfaces. I know some people might say if you can get a Rubik's Cube and use that to help form your boxes, that can help. I never really tried doing that, but I felt like that's something that could be useful. When it comes to learning a lot of these techniques, each individual learns differently, and if you know how you are able to learn or able to digest information really easily, then that's the way you need to be going. But there's always, like I said in different episodes, there's always that trial and error. You just got to figure out what works for you and what helps you learn much more cohesively, so you can actually be able to push yourself even further, basically, is what I'm trying to say. So with some of the things that some people like to say, that I asked what is good form or what do you consider bad form, this person in particular was talking about drifting when you're not supposed to. And in this person's opinion, it's a big one because he sees it a lot, but not many talk about it. And it's the antithesis of having a clean, sharp, crisp, mechanical form. Drifting is when you have hands/digits that are supposed to be staying still/static for that moment, but you accidentally start drifting it around. So like I was saying earlier, where your hand is supposed to be staying still, kind of just starts moving slightly in a direction, kind of, as he put it, drifting. And another great example of something that he was talking about is in terms of bad form is dropping hands during transitions, which I'm kind of confused about because I don't really know what. I guess I haven't seen a lot of that to happen. So he says even worse than drifting is dropping hands, especially dropping it off the grid. New glovers tend to think in moves and may sometimes drop their hands in between moves when they get stuck. This looks super bad, keeps transitions within the same grid position as moves. I totally agree with that. Never, again, like I said, I haven't really seen that. Then again, most of the time I'm watching videos, so who knows, maybe I'm just not picking it up as I should be. But I do understand where this person comes from. A lot of people, I can totally understand where they kind of lose their train of thought and they kind of get stuck. I never really see dropping of hands. What I tend to see from a lot of people that makes me at least think that they have just kind of lost their train of thought and now are kind of stuck is when they get into a certain position and they just hold their hands there for a minute. I can understand if you're doing certain tech type movements where, it staying still kind of gives, emphasis on that position and the shape that you're creating. However, I just see sometimes where people kind of just get into a normal, starting position, whether it be tutting or liquid or, digits or dials or whatever. They kind of just sit there for like a minute and then start doing something. To me, that's something that shouldn't be happening. You shouldn't just kind of like stop and stay still for a second. If you're in that kind of position where you're kind of stuck and you're holding your hands in that kind of position, a very simple way to help you think of what you need to do next while also not letting the show kind of stand still is, hold that position and just kind of like do a quick rotation around of depth perception where it comes around and it comes back around. That gives you enough time where you're not really having to think of what you're doing, but you're thinking about, okay, where should I need to go into next? Because you're not really changing your hand's position, you're just keeping things in motion so that your viewer is not bored, but it gives you the time period that you can actually sit there and think, okay, what should I go next? All right, let me do this. And then you go on from there. That's just kind of something that always kind of turns me off when I see that, is when it just stops and it's not really happening. It's just like, okay, where are we going next? You know what I mean? So that's one of the things. Another great example that this person was talking about when it comes to like linking finger rolls, like I was saying together, is that your hand's supposed to look like one entity. So like I said, if your palms are parallel to the floor, you're in a good technique. You should have your elbows kind of tucked in, not really touching each other, but you can if you want, if that's more comfortable. I tend to just have them a little bit forward but still on my side and be able to do the finger roll, same way. Now when it comes to like the quote unquote overhand thing, I will certainly tell you some people like to keep their hands tucked in or their elbows tucked in. Some people actually like having their elbows extended out. I'm one of those people that actually like having their elbows out a little bit more because I can still be able to do other things. I can go into tutting immediately right there and then, and my arms are in the position that they need to be to actually start doing that. That's the thing I'm trying to help people really understand and utilize when it comes to practice and training and things like that when they're actually trying to expand on their forms, is that you really need to work on the foundation of what gets you there with your arms and elbows as well as your hands. And I will certainly say when it comes to what people like to call the perfect circle, I call it the continuous. I just call it the pinwheel just because it's in a continuous motion and it looks like a pinwheel to me. It says a lot of tutorials on the circle whip technique. A perfect circle will have high elbows, often above your head, open and close completely without much gap in the circle, wrists back, and trace out a nice round outline. Things like that, which I did find interesting. And another thing that he also wanted to say is falling off the grid, where centering the show and don't unintentionally go out of eyesight or out of focus or stray too far or get too close. That's just something that you're going to have to learn over time, and I will certainly say that not every viewer that you're going to have is going to enjoy the same style of light show performance in terms of being too close or too far away. I can certainly tell you that I'm not a huge fan of having things just so close up in my face all the time. I like the whole idea of depth perception. So, if you're up in my face all the time, I'm going to start leaning back just a little bit just so I can kind of put myself in the proper place that I feel as a viewer should be, as opposed to the person who's doing the performance, But again, that's just me. People might say that I'm wrong to do that. Whatever the case may be, I just feel more comfortable doing it myself because I want to put myself in a viewing position where I can actually enjoy it more from my end and not necessarily from the performer's end, So, you have those ideas for yourself to work with. Another huge thing that I feel like people might overlook or just not even think about, but actually watching competition videos is actually a really good way to help you find the quote-unquote proper technique, especially if you watch it at the very beginning of the rounds and you follow it all the way up to the finals to, because I'm not saying this in terms of the capacity of competition. I'm just saying that when it comes to judges, there is a consensus of proper technique. And watching the people who move their way up all the way to the finals of winning would give you a good indication of proper technique by watching their placement of their elbows, their shoulders, their hands, their arms, all that stuff. And I can certainly tell you that there are certain videos out there that might be a little bit too dark to help you actually see that. It does suck. However, if you just analyze the video very carefully, whether if you're just on YouTube and clicking play, pause very rapidly for slow motion action. If I remember correctly, YouTube should have a slow feature that you can utilize, which also will be very helpful. That way you're seeing what the judges are looking for and what they're counting as good in terms of proper technique. I still watch competition videos all the time, and it's usually just to watch people's technique, is to literally see how people not only place their hands, but place their arms and their elbows and so on and so forth. I've been pretty much just doing the echo chamber lately in this episode. But you have things like that. Okay, those are some of the tools that will help you actually expand and actually understand the foundations of proper technique. And it's not just, pretty much putting things in certain places. It's literally how you get to those positions and how you move in and out of those positions is what you want to focus on. As much as people don't think it's actually necessary to understand, to me, I find it absolutely crucial because, it's not like you're going to go up against a Kung Fu master who has, and you are a person with zero experience of any techniques of fighting and expecting that you're going to win just because there's no need of technique, So one other thing I do want to kind of help you expand upon the idea of proper technique is to utilize different forms of visualization. Okay. When I was talking to my husband about this subject matter, I was asking him what are some of the tools that ballroom dancers use to help people learn the steps and the techniques to get where they need to be. Now, I know I kind of went a little far-fetched when I asked him this question, because what I asked him, I was like, is there any type of brace that people can wear to keep their arms and their back in the proper position for ballroom dancing? He's like, no, that just sounds like a torture device, which if I actually think about it, yeah, I was pretty much thinking of a torture device, but I was just trying to think of tools to help people learn the proper technique to get in those positions that they need to be in. Now, he did explain to me that when it comes to the arm placement, that kind of boils down to the instructor. And, he did say traditionally when it comes to certain ballroom dances, like the waltz, the Viennese waltz, the foxtrot and stuff, that you have to have your arm pretty much parallel with your shoulder, and it has to stay that way, and your back has to be completely straight with a nice straight line. That's why I was asking him. I was like, is there any tools that they have to help people keep, muscle memory that position into their inventory? And he said, no, that's kind of just far-fetched. What he did tell me is that they used to have painted on footprint method step. I don't really know how to explain it, but basically it's literally just something painted on the ground where it's numbered and it shows where your feet are supposed to be. And I pretty much just call it the footprint method. He did say that it was named after somebody, but he can't remember, and I just don't know how to actually look it up. I tried, and it wasn't really getting me anywhere, as unusual as that may be. So I was thinking about this method and how we can actually apply it to gloving. And one interesting way that I kind of came up with, that I actually hope that you guys will actually try out and experiment with to see if this actually will work. I will actually try it myself eventually here soon to actually see if I can figure out a good method to expand it on to everyone. But to facilitate the footprint method, what is a way that gloving can use that? Well, a lot of us practice in front of a mirror, right? So why not utilize the mirror to map out a sequence to help facilitate that visualization and things like that, to help learn the steps. Now, I can certainly understand when it comes to like things like tutting and stuff where you can just watch the tutorial videos to help you. But when it comes to more of things like depth perception or grid work or things like that, that we can actually utilize the mirror in the way that the footprint method uses to help facilitate. So a good example that I want to use when I was thinking about this is depth perception. Okay, so when things are closer to the viewer, it should be moving much more around, as things in the back should be moving a little bit less. And that whole idea came from what Walt Disney actually created through the multi-plane camera method. Now, let me kind of give you a quick, brief history on this to help facilitate what I'm talking about. Walt Disney wanted to actually make cartoons a little bit more realistic in terms of depth perception, right? So when you actually just take a 2D printed picture in a camera and move it forward, everything starts moving. Even the foreground, the midground, and the background all move forward, right? So what he did is he actually took a picture and separated each ground, basically, as I like to call it, in 4 different parts. So you had the background, you had the mid background, you had the mid foreground, you had the foreground. They were all 4 different separate spots. So what the effect was able to create is that as he moves the foreground up forward faster, the background stays the same, just like how reality tends to work with depth perception. This is something, when I found a video on Facebook about it, really got me thinking about how we can utilize depth perception in gloving. And with the footprint technique, I think this is probably a good way to start utilizing depth perception in a more training capacity. So if you take a mirror, probably a good sized mirror, enough that shows pretty much your whole upper half of your body, and what you want to do is use a dry erase marker or a wet erase marker. I probably would do a wet erase marker just because it's probably easier to clean off, is to literally put a dot in the center of where your movements are going to be, right? Where you usually keep your hands. What you find to be your center of your show is where you want to put that dot. And then what you want to do is actually draw a good little size box around it, and then make a bigger size box around that one. And then what you want to do is actually connect the corners into the center where you made your dot, right? And then what I'm wanting to do is actually kind of erase the majority of the lines that the boxes are creating. So you kind of just keep the corners there, but you kind of get rid of the sides, right? So now you have these kind of target marks on your mirror now, right? You have the big box and the small box in the center. So what will help facilitate this depth perception idea is that when you're looking at the mirror, you know where your center is, right? So you have your hands in the center. And let's just say you put your hands on top of each other, facing towards that center, palms facing towards the center, right? What you want to do is just separate your hands and bring one back a little bit and one a little bit forward. Now, when it comes to depth perception, what I know a lot of people might want to do is actually do it from how they perceive it, which would be the opposite of what your viewer is going to see. So whatever you're doing, you might want to flip it because the viewing from your viewer is going to be different. So with depth perception, the front's going to be moving around a lot more. So in this case, what you want to do is have your hand actually tracing the outlines of the big box, while your hand in the back is actually tracing the smaller box. This is going to facilitate your depth perception motion, okay? Now, you can also switch it around where the smaller box is being traced by the front hand as the bigger box is being traced by the back hand. These are different forms of manipulating depth perception. And this was just a simple idea that I came up with through just various different methods I've seen around outside of gloving, basically, and trying to bring that in. That's the whole idea that I want to try to help with a lot of newcomers, is really utilizing outside sources to facilitate your methods of training and practicing and concept creation and all that stuff. So with that whole mirror technique thing that I'm talking about, that's not only facilitating a way to actually practice with the footprint method, but this is also tying in the whole multi-plane camera method that Walt Disney has created to really help facilitate depth perception in cartoons. Okay, and that's where I'm taking this and running it with gloving, basically. So That's something I would like you guys to try out and see if that works. If that's not really working out for you, I can probably spend time to actually take pictures and facilitate what I'm actually trying to facilitate so you guys can understand where I'm coming from on this. That's one of the things I really want a lot of my listeners to actually start thinking about is what, when you're watching things that are not related to gloving. I'm not saying that you should have this on your mind 24/7, but when you see something interesting, kind of like the multi-plane camera method that Walt Disney came up with, my mind immediately wanted to bring that into gloving, and I think I found a way to try to incorporate that. It's just something that I want to try to expand on a little bit more. We'll see how that goes in the next coming weeks, next coming months. I don't know. I'll let you guys know soon enough. But I think that's pretty much all for my episode this week. I really, really want to thank everybody who has been communicating with me on various platforms on this subject matter. If it wasn't for you guys, I wouldn't have a whole lot of content to actually talk about. I definitely want to hear your guys' thoughts and comments on this subject matter. What do you find to be proper technique? What do you think is bad technique practices? What kind of pitfalls or traps do you think people fall into when it comes to proper technique training? I want to hear. I definitely want to hear this stuff. I want to talk to you about this stuff. It'd be very interesting to have a discussion on. And the various places that you can hit me up at to talk to me about this is on the Facebook page, aptly named The Gloving Paradigm. You can also hit me up at my email personally at muttonchopguy@gmail.com. You can also get me on Reddit under the username muttonchopguy. I try to post as much as I can. And of course, you guys can definitely find me on my Discord server, which will be linked in this episode's description. But basically, that is this episode. I really hope you guys have been enjoying the content that I have been creating for you guys. I really do want to hear some of the feedback that you guys have said. I know somebody finally posted a comment on one of my episode posts on Reddit saying that he really enjoyed it. I highly appreciate that you've enjoyed the content that I've created. It is nice to know when one's work is appreciated. Please do not hesitate to let me know anything more that I can help improve on the show or things that you want to hear about or want me to cover. I'm more than glad to try to do that best to my abilities. Of course, that is all for my episode. So I am your host, Peter, aka LPD8 Dubuque, and I'll see you guys all next week.